Hi, I'm Neil McCormick and you're watching Needle Time with my guest, a man who can make a guitar sound like a menagerie, a zoo, a rhino, a whale, an elephant. It's ADRIAN Bellew.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, Adrian, you are, one of the extraordinary guitarists of our age. You've worked with Bowie and Talking Heads. You're a part of King Crimson. You're currently, I know, have a real 21st century supergroup, Gizmodrone, with the great Stuart Copeland on drums and Mark King on bass.
Yes.
And I always forget the Italian guys' name.
Vittorio Cosma.
Cosma on keyboards, but making something which Stuart Copeland claims is punk prog. So we're going to talk about all of this. But let's start with your instrument of choice, the guitar. You're a totally distinctive guitarist. You've taken the electric guitar into other places where it wasn't designed to go. Why were you playing the guitar in the first place? What made you want to be a guitarist?
I was a drummer in a teen band right after the Beatles arrived in American shores. My teen band dressed like the Beatles. We played all the Beatles music. I was the drummer, and I could sing like Paul or John, or even George. And I was really happy doing that. I didn't have any aspirations to play guitar, but I could hear songs in my head. And so at age 16, a junior in high school, I contracted mononucleosis, which means you have to stay at home with a tutor and you're not allowed to play drums. You have to sit still. So I decided, well, I'll borrow a guitar from my friends in the band and I'll try to teach myself, and I did. By the time I finished, after 2 months, I'd figured it out on my own, where fingers go to make the sounds that I want. And, when I finished, I had 5 songs, and I took them back to my Beatle band, which was called the Denims, because we wore denim outfits. And they said, "What the hell are those chords?" And I said, "I don't know. I guess that's G demolished. This is A furnished flat." I still don't know what the chords are. I'm totally self-taught on all the instruments I play and in every other way. But once that happened, was around the time, 1966, 67, where there was an influx of virtuoso guitar playing, and also the industry itself suddenly turned from being just an amplifier to, you can have these pedal things too. You can stomp on this and get a fuzzy sound. You had Jimi Hendrix and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton. They were the monster guitar gods. And that kind of fueled my interest to, okay, maybe I want to play guitar. And after a few years of sort of learning all kinds of styles and listening to so many records and figuring out every single thing that interested me in any style, I found coming into the 70s that I was a good mimic. I could sound like a lot of different people. Well, where was me? So whenever I would be playing, in a cover band, and we'd be playing, some song by who knows, the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or Steely Dan or whatever, when it come to the point where I would play the normal lick that's supposed to be there, I would substitute it for something of my own making. What I first realized is I love to make the guitar sound like things. So one of the first things was use the volume pedal and put these 2 notes together and kind of bend them. You got a car horn. So I'd play my typical solos with sounding like whoever is supposed to. And then at the end, I'd make a car horn, and the audience would go, "Yeah, oh, that's cool." Next song, I'd put a seagull in there. So I had found, kind of inadvertently found my own little piece of real estate in that giant world of guitar players who can play so many things. And my real estate was do something no one else is doing with the guitar, make it sound like other instruments, make it sound like animals or machinery or whatever you want.
It's interesting because that's where the guitar has ended up now, as, it goes through pedals. And the great technical virtuoso guitarists that you mentioned, Jimi Hendrix and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, they are not the guitar heroes of now. Now, you know, we maybe have the edge in you too, who comes more from your school, which is going through effects units. In fact, every guitarist that you see now is surrounded by a board of pedals, and you are playing with your feet. That kind of interest, because you've got an awful lot of tapping and.
I grew up through this whole era of watching technology just evolve. I was the first person who ever had a GR300 guitar synthesizer given to me in Japan when I arrived there with Talking Heads. The Roland just came and gave it to me here, you know. So I arrived home and I had the first one. And so I had to figure out, even without a manual, you know, the Japanese manual, I had to figure out, well, what do you do with this technology? And it's always been my friend, because it causes me to think of new things, do new things, find new sounds, new techniques that I wouldn't otherwise have in my toolbox. You
played with Frank Zappa, and that's kind of where you get introduced to the wider world. You know, obviously a brilliant musician, a completely original character, a very demanding band leader, I hear. In his expectation of how things should be played. So what was it like to be?
Well, first of all, I was the only musician in the band who was brand new, fresh and green. I'd never even flown on a plane until I flew out to audition in California in his basement of his house, which would eventually become his studio. I was also the only total self-taught person. Everyone else in the band gets sheet music and follow, and very difficult music. So Frank's answer to that, we rehearsed for 3 months in a film studio, full production, 8 to 10 hours a day, Monday through Friday. Very, very difficult material. On Friday, I would get in Frank's car, I would go to his house, and I'd stay for the whole weekend. He would show me, sit down, and with just the two of us, here's what's coming up next week, and you need to start learning this by rote. That's how I learned 5 hours of Frank Zappa material. And things would happen while we were there. For example, one time he showed me a song he was writing, sounded like a bad folk song to me, so I started singing like Bob Dylan, I ask as nice as I could. And he said, that's it, that's going to be in the show, you know. So I had a great relationship with Frank for that year of my life. He taught me a lot of things about how to be an actual professional touring musician, how to run your own business, how to master records, all that stuff. And some musical tips, too.
Don't know much about that. That's why I got this song. One of my legs is shorter than the other and both my feet's too long. Of course, I'm right along with him. Got no natural rhythm, but I go dancing every night. Hope one day I might get it right. Dancing fool, dancing fool, dancing fool, dancing fool. I hear that beat jump out of my seat, but I can't compete because I'm a dancing fool. The disco folks all dressed up like they fit to kill. Walk on in and see them there, gonna give them all a thrill. When they see me coming, they all step aside. They has a fit while I commit my social suicide. I'm a dancing fool. I'm a dancing fool. I'm a dancing fool. I'm a dancing fool. The beat goes on, but I'm so wrong. Oh, the beat goes on, but I'm so wrong. So wrong, the beat is on, but I'm so wrong, the beat is on, but I'm so wrong, the beat is on, and I'm so wrong. I'm ever totally wrong, but I'm a dancing fool. I'm ever totally wrong, but I'm a dancing fool. Yowza, yowza, yowza. I got it all together now with my very own disco clothes. Hey, my shirt's half open just to show you my chain in the snow.
Then, of course, I landed in David Bowie's band.
Well, you landed in.
Yeah.
You landed in because Stuart Copeland said, ask him how David Bowie stole from Frank Zappa.
Yeah. Well, you know, we arrived with Frank, my first time in Europe, and we played in Germany, in Cologne. I didn't know this. Brian Eno was in the audience. Brian Eno knew that David was looking for a new guitarist for his upcoming tour. He called David the next day and said, you must see the guitar player that Frank Zappa has. So 2 nights later, we played in Berlin, which is where David was. There was a part of the show where Frank would take a long solo with just the drummer and bass player. Everyone else in the band would leave for 10 minutes. As I was leaving, I looked over here to the monitor mixing board, and there's David Bowie and Iggy Pop. So I walk over to David, and I shake his hand, and I say, thank you so much. You know, I know your music so well, and I love it. Thank you for everything you've done. And he said, great, how'd you like to be in my band? So there you go. As it turned out, his tour started a couple weeks after Frank's tour ended, and we worked everything out in detail later. But that night, an amazing thing happened. David said, well, I'll meet you back in the lobby of your hotel, and we'll go out and talk about this. We'll have dinner. So I came back to the hotel, and there's David sitting over in the corner with his assistant, and sort of behind a plant, you know, very tucked away. And I go over, and they go, shh, don't say anything. Just go up to your room, and then come back down in the elevator in 5 minutes. We'll be outside, the black limousine. I thought, oh, great, this is like a spy film or something. This is wonderful. So I do exactly that. I go out and I get in the limo, and we start driving. How many restaurants are there in Berlin at that time? Probably 25,000. So we finally, David's really excited talking about the material we're going to do and how much he loved what I was doing. We finally arrive at the restaurant, and we go in the front door, me and David, and sitting right there at the first table is Frank Zappa and the rest of the band. This is true. We're busted.
Hi. I am Neil McCormick, and you're watching Needle Time with my guest, guitarist extraordinaire, ADRIAN BELEW. You worked with Bowie on The Lodger.
Yes.
It's one of his, he's made many weird albums. That's one of the weird ones.
Yeah, well, it was his third record for RCA, and he knew that they were going to drop him.
Right.
So 2 things happened. First of all, I'm just going to make the record I want to make. Secondly, the record label already saying we're not going to promote it anyway, so don't worry. That's why it's not as well known as some of his other records. But the lineup was pretty all-star. We had Tony Visconti as the producer, Brian Eno as co-producer, David Bowie. He had a great band. When I arrived in the studio, it was Lake Geneva, Switzerland. My first actual studio recording. Everything I had done previously with Frank was done live from shows we did around the world. And they had this idea. They were going to call this record Planned Accidents. So I arrived, they had 20 tracks already, kind of, you know, basic tracks, usually no vocal at all. And they said, what we want you to do is we're going to put you in the studio out there. The studio was in the room above, you know. They had a camera. They could see me. I couldn't see them. And you'll hear a click in your headphones, tick, 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 and you just start playing. All right, okay, can I hear the song first? No. Well, what key is it in? No, no. Just go play. And I did that, you know, to a bunch of tracks. And they would usually let me do it for 2 times through. And then, you know, by the end of the second time, I might actually know, oh, I think the chorus is coming up here. But, you know, really it was getting my totally off the top of my head, fresh impressions. So when you listen to songs like DJ and Red Sails and Boys Keep Swinging, all those songs, those are me just figuring out the song as I'm going along.
You worked with some amazing people around that time. You know, Talking Heads, one of the great bands, really. I mean, phenomenal live band.
Oh, I loved Talking Heads when I was in the band.
And David Byrne's such a great songwriter. And you were on Remain in Light, I think. And
Remain in Light, all done in one day.
Really?
I showed up early in the morning in New York City. They said, you know, would you like to play on our record? Once again, there was no vocals, no nothing, just backing tracks. And Brian Eno was there again. Brian Eno and David Byrne and Jerry Harrison. And, you know, I went out to the studio and put my little guitar setup, which 7 pedals at that point. And I started testing everything. And I could see them in the control room. And they're just going crazy. So they, you know, they'd come in and say, okay, here's what we want you to do. We've got this track right here. We don't even know what it's going to be called. But what we want you to do is just put a guitar solo where you think it might be in the song. And David will write the song around that. So I go out, you know, I'm listening to the track, very groovy track. I really like this. Really, you know, actually very inspiring for me. I could have played all day on any of those tracks. They're very comfortable for me. And I knew the band by then. So we were friends. I wait a minute and a half or two, and then I launch into a guitar solo, and I play, and I see them jumping up and down and bouncing off the walls. So I go, okay, I guess I should wait a little bit longer, and I'll put a second one in. And that became a song called The Great Curve, which many people have since told me was one of their favorite guitar solo pieces. We did that with all of that record. Then they put out the record, and only then did they realize with all these extra parts that they had, they were no longer a four-piece band who could play their music. So they called me and several other people, and they did the extended band. You know, four-piece band turned into, first on stage, a five-piece band with me joining them for Psycho Killer, and then the rest of the band members coming out and being a very groovy, wonderful, tribal kind of, you know, grooving band with David and me going crazy on guitar, David singing. If you care to see that, it's there's a YouTube of Talking Heads in Rome that everyone always tells me is the pinnacle of that. Yeah. For me, I loved everyone in the band, and I loved what was happening with them because I was watching this thing take off. And it was totally obvious to me that they were on their way to stardom. I wasn't in the band. I was just a sideman for them. But I could see what was happening. I first found out, they first approached me after they saw me play at Madison Square Garden with David Bowie. Okay. And they were in the front row along with Mick and Bianca and Dustin Hoffman and Andy Warhol and all the other stars. Quite a scene for a green young Kentuckian. Right.
You're first, the band that you're probably most associated with as a band is King Crimson. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't the first generation of King Crimson.
Second.
And this is Robert Fripp. And Robert Fripp is a guitarist who's also played with Bowie and who also uses pedals and distorts sounds and so on. So how did that work? Was that a good fit? Were you a King Crimson fan before?
I was. I knew all of the older King Crimson records. Of course, they stopped in, I think, somewhere around 1972, and it wasn't till 1981 when we started up again, and I was in the band, a fresh band with Bill Bruford on drums, Tony Levin on bass, Robert and I on guitars. It was a huge step forward for me because all my life I had planned on making my own music and being the front man and the singer and songwriter, and I'd worked really hard on that. But up to that point, I'd only been a sideman for Frank, David, Talking Heads. Now Robert was saying to me, let's start a band with Bill Bruford, and I want you to write the songs, you to write the lyrics. I want you to be in front of the band, and you and I will develop a guitar thing together. And we worked on it for endlessly. We went on to work, Robert and I, on and off for 33 years. I was in each new incarnation of the band.
What could you get working with another guitarist like that? What that you couldn't do on your own?
Well, there's first of all, just factually speaking, you can't play what Robert and I played together with one guitar. You could maybe do it with looping, but it wouldn't be the same. It was really one of those periods for me where I was really put on the spot because first of all, I knew what high regard King Crimson was held in, the original bands. All my musicians friends were like, this is the best band since the Beatles. And I kind of felt the same way. Only better players, maybe. You know, they were more adventurous, more exploratory. So, you know, I knew my position in the band was one, now I have to come up with something. So I was always on the spot, you know, always trying to write something new with Robert, craft something different. That was kind of the motto of the band, you know, reinvent the wheel every time we do. Go in the studio and every time we go on a tour. And it worked really, really well.
You know, that's a lot of what you're doing, reinventing the guitar every time you do it. Do you still find yourself looking for new things you can do and new ways to do it?
Of course, yeah. I never have stopped. I guess I learned from people like David Bowie or Frank Zappa right off the bat that you should always be moving forward. You shouldn't just do the same thing from record to record. And the Beatles were a bit like that as well. And all those people are the people I kind of learned from before I was able to cut loose and be myself. So I've always, even as a songwriter, singer, lyricist, recording artist, I've got 20 solo records you probably don't know about.
Oh, I do know about them.
But every one of them I've tried to push my boundaries forward, except, of course, with the guitar as an instrument. As I said earlier, the technology is there. You can do anything with a guitar now. It's limitless. So I'm never going to stop, you know. I just really enjoy that. I enjoy, nothing makes me happier than to find a new sound, and all of a sudden I'll write 3 songs with that new sound. So it's an inspiration.
I am Neil McCormick, and you're watching Needle Time with my guest, Adrian Bellew. You mentioned that you have about 20 solo albums. You have many, many solo albums. In fact, so because you're such an extraordinary and inventive guitarist, you're known as a guitarist. But you have, as being a songwriter and a singer, how much of yourself, of your time, of your art do you dedicate to singing? As opposed to, you know.
I've been a singer since I was 5 years old. If you wanted to know how did I get into music, I really didn't have a choice. I mean, from the minute I was a little kid, I could mimic anything on the radio. If it was an Everly Brothers song, I could sing the weird Everly Brothers part. I just knew how to do it. Right. Same with sounds. I could always kind of understand what are the components of this sound. Okay. And I listened to so many records, and that's how I taught myself everything. But by the time I was 10 years old, I knew there was only one thing I wanted to do, play music. I didn't know what I would do with that, but I knew somehow I'd been given that talent and that I should do something with it. Of course, like every other teenage boy, when the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan, then I knew, yes, I want to be surrounded by screaming girls. But really what I wanted, and quickly came to the conclusion that it was the recording studio, which really fascinated me. Right. You know, how do you go in a recording studio and just make something up out of the air? It's like taking a canvas and painting on it, and all of a sudden there's something to look at, or there's something, in this case, to listen at. So I put it upon myself that I wanted to become a kind of full-on recording artist, be able to do everything, the drums, the piano, the keyboards, the cello, everything. And that's what I've kind of dedicated a lot of my time to. The guitar thing has come so easily and naturally to me. Right. It's like an extension of my arm. I just don't even think about it, you know. I have devoted thousands upon thousands of hours, you know, trying to go forward with it and add new tricks to my toolbox, but it comes to me naturally, as does singing.
And what about the songwriting then?
Songwriting has always been a bit more difficult, especially when you get into a band like King Crimson, or even if you're doing a solo record. But, you know, for many years, the hardest part for me was I could craft a song, not a problem, and I would work it out. Sometimes it would come like that, sometimes I'd have to work on it. But the lyrics were always a hard problem, because it seems like when you put words on something, now you're almost describing it for the listener. About 6 years ago, I invented something called Flux. It's an app, and it's music that's never the same twice. So you download this app from iTunes for $10, and every time you press play, you get a half an hour of music, and you get a half an hour of visuals, but most things last about 25 seconds before they're interrupted by the next thing. So if I put a song in there, I play everything in the song, there might be 5 versions of the song with 3 different guitar solos, and you might hear the second verse and chorus one time, and 3 days later you'll hear the end of the song, and maybe every now and then you'll hear the whole song. So that was my attempt to open up my mind to everything is usable. Because all my life I've had little 15-minute bits or a sound loop or something I wanted to put on a record, but when it was back in the day we had to write 12 songs and then wait to that point and put out a record, there was no place for those things. Mm-hmm. Now with Flux, I can do that, and that's what it is. And it's never finished, and I keep doing it all the time. So the reason I'm mentioning this is after I developed that, and it took 2.5 years for my friends in Amsterdam to invent the technology to go with it, I suddenly realized that I could write songs just like that, lyrics and everything, all at once. And now that's how I do it. And I write songs all the time. I have an acoustic guitar right beside my bed. When I wake up in the morning, that's when I really like to write. The birds are just singing. I pick up the guitar, and I have my little iPhone here, and I've got literally hundreds of things, ideas and songs and bits in my iPhone. I've got right now 20 songs sitting on my chalkboard in my studio waiting to be recorded.
All right.
But I got this
What
call.
was that kind of, you set your mental process free in some way by realizing it didn't have to be the finished definitive version?
Not that it didn't have to be finished. They do have to come up to my standard. But what I realized is I wrote a 45-second song called One More Day. And in that song, it was a complete thought. Now, normally I would have to say, okay, now let's write a chorus to that, and then let's write a second verse that basically is a reiteration of the first verse, and so on. That's how you craft a pop song or any song. But I released myself from that form, and I said, well, there's no reason for me to have to do that now. I'm not on the radio, and no one gives a damn. So I'm free to take that 45-second song and put it on in Flux. That's the song. It's done. You know, of course, I produce it and play everything and get it exactly the way I want it. But I guess what I've broken free of is the form that has been in existence for 60 years, primarily so you could play it on a radio. 3-minute form, 4-minute form,
because
verse,
even
chorus,
though,
verse, chorus.
Even though your playing is very experimental, your approach to sound is very experimental, and sometimes your song forms are, sometimes they're not. There's a lot of rock and roll and Beatles in what you do. And
definitely Beatles in there.
Yeah. There's, let's talk about the couple of hits that you've had in this vast
I didn't know I had any.
Well, there's Oh Daddy.
Oh Daddy, yeah, Oh Daddy. That's
which is
an interesting
basically a rock and roll
song.
song.
You know, that's an interesting song to me because I really did it for fun. I didn't even want to put it on the record. But what happened, I was writing this song, and my 10-year-old daughter said, Dad, I'd like to do something in the studio with you. So I quickly sat at the piano and wrote this song called Oh Daddy, where I'm talking about how I'm going to be a big star, and she's saying, oh, great, you know, maybe you can buy me Disney World, and silly stuff like that. At the time, I was working in a studio in Wisconsin, and it happened, just so happened, a guy from Atlantic Records popped his head in the studio and heard me recording that song, which is really, for me, it's a novelty song. I've never done anything like it before or since. And he went back to Atlantic Records and said, I think this guy, Adrian Belew, has a hit song on his hands, let's sign him. So they signed me to Atlantic Records for 3 records, of course. And the first record, Mr. Music, had that one song on it, and everything else on it was totally different and totally removed from Oh Daddy World. So the same with the next 2 records. So that was kind of my one time that I got that attention. It was in the MTV era, where if you could make a cute little video to go with it, you were okay.
It's funny because the song is about, you know, when are you going to make a hit?
Yeah.
And you got a hit.
Yeah, that is pretty funny. The second time I had any kind of success in that world was with David Bowie.
Yeah, Pretty Pink
in
Rose.
1990, he asked me to be his music director for a large world tour that was going to go for a full year, 27 countries. And I was just finishing my second solo record for Atlantic called Young Lions. And I said, well, David, the only thing is, I got this new record and I would like to be able to promote it somehow. So he said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we do one of my songs on your new record, and that will help promote it with my tour. So he sent me a song called Pretty Pink Rose. And here it was, here's my situation. I get this sort of demo tape that he's made with a band I won't mention. And it's terrible. I mean, it was just the lamest version of anything. It's just so wallpaper. And for a moment, I kind of flipped out and said, oh my gosh, here's my chance. I get to do a duet with David Bowie, and he sends me a song that's not that good. But, you know, it was that good. It's just that they had done not a good version. So I went about completely revamping it. I played everything on it, and then I took it to New York, and one day I find myself, here's me and David Bowie. There's a microphone between us, and he's singing and I'm singing, and quite a moment in my life to see that happen.
I'm Neil McCormick, and you're watching Needle Time with my guest, Adrian Bellew. I'm going to talk about your new group, Gizmo Drone. But before we do that, let me ask you, if guitar, it was the dominant instrument of the rock and roll era, do you think it has a future?
I absolutely think it has a future. And I know that there are a lot of people now making big records without ever touching a guitar. And you know, I know all about that. But I don't think that discounts what you can do with a guitar. I think rock and roll is certainly going to continue to change and move forward. And I foresee that I'll be playing it until the moment I pass out. And as I said earlier, I think there's still so much to develop with that particular instrument. But there's also that energy that happens when you've got bass, drums, guitar, whatever, together in a room together, which brings us to
Gizmo Drone.
Gizmo Drone,
where you've
yes.
got particularly good bass, drums and guitar and keyboards. You've got Stuart Copeland from The Police on drums. You've got Mark King from Level 42
Pretty
on
amazing.
bass. You've got yourself and you've got Vittorio
Cosma
on keyboards, an Italian sort of progressive rock
Right.
musician, who's
The
kind of
master of
holding it
Italian
together
progressive.
because, you know, you're three kind of busy players.
Well, we are when you let us be. And now, if you say don't be, then we can do that too. But there were no shackles upon us whatsoever. I'm going to tell you my side of the Gizmo Drum story. For 2 summers, I got some emails from Vittorio and also a producer named Claudio Dentes saying every summer Stuart Copeland comes over and we just kind of hang out in a villa with a pool. We eat pasta, we hang out in the Italian sun, and we just do one show or play a few songs together. Would you like to do that? Well, the first summer I couldn't. I was fully booked. Second summer I couldn't. Third summer they're still knocking on my email door and I say, well, yeah, I think I can. So I arrive in Milan. First of all, there is no villa. There is no swimming pool. And I'm thinking I'm going to play guitar on 4 songs of Stuart Copeland's project. Naturally, I would do that because I've always wanted to work with Stuart, one of the top 5 drummers. Everyone says that. I didn't know Mark King. I didn't really know Vittorio. I'd only met him once. I didn't know Claudio, but the same thing once. So I walked in thinking I was just going to be playing 4 songs, and then they tricked me. They really tricked me because, you know, normally if I would go and play on a session, they would set me up in the control room, like it's in there, and the artist would be right here. Let's say he's Trent Reznor. And Trent would put up a track, and he'd say, is there anything you want to play on this? Sure, I could play this, or I could play that. And then after 4 days of that, I'd leave, and they'd turn it into whatever they liked, you know, pick the parts that they liked. In this case, I walked in, and there was a full-on, big, huge recording room with all of our instruments set up, so we could see each other, we could play with each other, we could talk to each other, and we started right in. Here's the song we're going to learn. Okay. It took about, no time to learn it. Very easy song, but I really liked it. And then we'd go out in the studio and start working it up, and pretty soon it would take on a new life of its own, And we could see each other, and we were laughing and having a ball, And really, after the second or third day of doing that, it's rather than stay 4 songs, I wanted to stay longer. And it turns out that Stuart had already concocted his master plan, which was to trick me into wanting to join it and be in a band. And that's kind of what happened for everyone, I think. As we progressed deeper and deeper into this record, not only did we find out we loved each other, we loved hanging out, we were having a ball, very fun, but we also found out that, wow, we're really truly kind of breaking some new ground here, and this is too good not to continue. So by the end of that week, I was calling home and saying, I think I'm in a band now. I didn't, I already have a band, the Adrian Bellew Power Trio, which travels around the world. Mark King already has a band, Level 42. It was the last thing in my mind that I was going to join a band. I just got out of a band called King Crimson. They booted me out, so I was thinking I'll probably never join another band. So the serendipity of it all is great. For once something gets put together, and it actually is really much better than you think it's going to be, and you're really excited about it. So that's where we are.
Do you think you are, particularly simpatico players because, as I say, you're all kind of busy players. Or is it simply that that level of musicianship raises the standard of everybody else?
Well, for one thing, we're all busy players, but we're all experienced players. I've made in the last 16 years that Stuart has been writing symphonies and doing film scores. I've probably put out 16 records a year. So we know what goes into making a record. We even know what goes into making a pop song. We weren't there to do that. We were just there to kind of blow it out, you know, and just have fun. The songs, for me, the thing I liked about it is every song that they pulled out of their cookie jar, as Stuart calls it, I instantly just knew what to do. They were custom made for me. They felt just like they did when I joined up with Talking Heads and made Remain in Light. It was the same experience for me. I'm thinking, well, now I'm not the singer, I'm not the front man, I'm not writing the songs, I'm the guitar player. All right, great. Put up the track. Bam, I know what, and I'd play something and know that's exactly what I wanted to do. Fortunately, it would kind of tear the song a little bit, the fabric of the song, and turn it in a new direction for everyone, and everyone would respond to that. And that's exactly what Stuart and Vittoria were hoping would happen with me and Mark King. Another time I remember Mark King started singing a part that wasn't on there, and they said, wow, that's incredible. That's so different than what we expected. That's what we want. So that's how this synergy kind of just went through the ceiling in about 10 or 12 days.
So is Gizmodrome going to exist as the problem with supergroups? Always is the people are established artists in their own right, and they all have different projects and different things going on, and usually got solo careers and so on.
Well, you know, in the last 5 years of my life, I thought I was going to be in Nine Inch Nails.
Right.
I was thrown out of that band after 17 days of rehearsal.
Why were you thrown out of Nine Inch Nails?
I've never really told that story, but I will tell you as briefly as I can. Trent called me and said, we're going to do a 1.5-year tour, and we want you to be in the band. I want you and me to reinvent the sound of Nine Inch Nails. Wow, that sounds great. And then we're going to play shows all around the world, and I'll pay you $1 million. Okay, great, I'll do that then. Because I had learned 21 songs exactly like the records. Not a single beat changed, nothing. And I realized around that time, well, we're not reinventing these songs now, we're just going to play them. Then I also realized, well, now we're going to play them exactly that way every night because you have playback. You're actually playing along with the parts that are already there. You're playing along with a click track. The lights are happening exactly in the same spot every night, so you can't change. That's kind of,
I agree.
That's kind of the death of me.
That's wrong with most live music.
Well, that's the death of me. I want to be creative and change every night. And creativity is all I care about in music. I think at the same time he realized I was superfluous to the whole thing. So I get the call from his manager. Oh, he's changed his mind. I've put my whole life on hold for a year. I've, told my band to go and find things to do. It was quite a thing to recover from, an enormous shock, and financially a pretty big shock too. It took me 6 months to start doing anything again. So in that time though, I had been in a band called King Crimson for 33 years, and then I got an email from Robert Fripp who said, I'm starting a new King Crimson and you're not right for this band. Done. Okay, at this point in my life I'm thinking, gee, what have I done? And it turns out to be the best thing that ever happened for me, and hopefully for those guys too. I'm happy for them. But suddenly the door opened for me to be ADRIAN Bellew again, and that's all I could do. And then I get a call from Pixar, and they want me to do a film with them. I do 3 years of writing a film with them. I win an Oscar for it, first film ever. I invent the Flux app and another Flux app called Flux Effects, which is an effects thing. I travel around the world for 5 years with my power trio. I do a David Bowie tribute, that's huge.
I saw that.
Put out about 16 more records, and bingo, I land up in Milan a few days into this recording session thinking, whoa, am I really going to get in another band again? But I just had to. I couldn't. I love it. I love this band. Will I sit here and tell you it's going to last forever or what's going to happen with it? I have no idea. But I'm telling you this, I will devote my time and effort to it until there's no reason to.
Well, thank you for coming.
My pleasure. This has been great. Thank you.
It is great to have such a talent on our show. It's Adrian Bellew
Thank
on
you.
Needle Time.
All paraffin heaters, no matter what kind, need a continuous flow of air to prevent poisonous fumes from building up. So keep a window or ventilator open.